There we go. All right, thanks for coming today. I was looking back and was feeling like it had just been a long time since Rise folks had come together and looked at things, and there have been a lot of updates. So I have a few things specifically that we're going to look at today, some new features. We're also going to talk about some things that I'm still seeing pretty consistently in courses that are coming my way. So just some reminders about that. And then cover a couple extra things too that have shown up recently or just changes in ways that we've done things. Rise has made huge strides in accessibility over the last 4 years since I've been here, and really over the last 1 year. We'll look at a document that they put out that kind of shows the speed of development that they have been doing over the last year. There's been a lot of changes over the last year. Some of them you probably noticed, some of you probably didn't. One of the big changes is they, like everyone else, is trying to heavily integrate AI. I can tell you that we made a distinct choice when we renewed to not integrate that. Paige, I know, tried the AI features quite a bit. Emily, was that your choice down at Boise too?
Yeah, we haven't added it on.
So there are some really good things that we may consider it again in the future. The biggest advantage that I have seen when I tested it was AI offers you the opportunity to take and reframe content in different blocks without having to do anything. So if, for example, and we'll look at an example of this, for a long time, as you all know, the process block was not accessible. So we quite often said, use the timeline block. Now that the process block is accessible, a lot of those older modules, and we'll look at an example of this, we are transforming to the process block because it is accessible now. But that's quite a process. You have to copy and paste all of the content. Sometimes images that you had in there no longer exist. With the AI, that kind of transform blocks feature in AI, that is one of the spots that I did see some genuine use. Is instead of copying and pasting, you just hit switch blocks and you move that into a process block, and it does it all for you. Outside of that, and Paige, you did more testing in it than I did. A lot of it are things that are pretty easily integrated using other AI features, whether you're using ChatGPT, Gemini, any of those things. It was like, make me a cute image of a squirrel or whatever, and then you've got that thing and it's in there. The other reason we chose not to integrate it is that right now it's a $250 per seat charge for each seat, and it is not an option to add individual seats. You have to do it across the entire account. So it was not reasonable in that space. Okay, I am going to share my screen. The first thing that we're going to do, let's see, we'll start with this screen. First thing I want to share with you is this website, and I'm going to put a link in the chat for it. This is the Rise maturity plan. Has anyone seen this website before? Maybe one or two. This is a great reference site to have just in your back pocket. It goes over all of the current issues that they know exist. They also have a VPAT that you can review where it goes over line by line everything that is and how they're meeting every bit of WCAG. But this one I have found really user-friendly. So it clearly identifies existing issues that are in there. For example, PDF exports are still not being tagged correctly. That is on their roadmap. We use this feature almost never. There's a couple of spaces sometimes where I've used it with one or two of you. The drag and drop block, that is the last block that is not accessible, but they do have an intention to make it accessible. Those of you at U of I that just went through the annual training know that a number of their trainings use the drag and drop block. It is not accessible. It's the last remainder. You just can't navigate it using a keyboard yet, but it is on the roadmap. It also gives you workarounds if there are some workarounds. There is, let's see, one spot, the horizon overlay modal. So this is when you're choosing your theme. There are 3 different options for them. There's the sidebar option, there's the kind of floating window, and then there's a horizontal modal window that will pop up on there. There are still 1 or 2 issues in there. I do have that noted in our authoring accessible Rise modules that it is accessible, but there are some funky, quirky things with it. So I do still suggest just sticking with the default sidebar navigation that shows up on there. Outside of all of the identified issues, if you scroll down on here, there's a resolved section, which is what I check maybe once a month. And right now it goes back to May 2024. This is when this website kind of launched. But you can see in 2024, the quote carousel block is now accessible. This is just individual statements about things that they knew were on the identified issues that they have fixed. So if we go all the way down, you can see just recently, audio transcripts to audio objects and custom blocks. We'll talk about that a little bit. And they also added a focus order panel to the custom blocks, and we're going to talk about that too. Color pickers, chart blocks. Those of you that are paying attention, the chart blocks are now accessible. They were not for a long time. They were kind of some of the last standouts of things that were not accessible. That may not always mean that you want to use the chart blocks, though. A lot of times the charts that are being integrated into Rise courses are a little bit more complex. And in that case, sometimes a chart block, even though you can navigate it by a keyboard and you can listen to it on a screen reader, it may not be the best way to represent that data. Sometimes, and this is where some of that nuance in the way we handle accessibility and best practices comes in, because there's a current WCAG requirement that states that if it can be live text, it should be live text. And one of the few exceptions to that rule is charts. And the reason for that is quite often a very brief description talking about the meaning of that chart in alt text is sometimes a better experience than reading the numbers off of a chart. Sometimes the numbers off of the chart don't really give you that same sense, or it can be a little bit harder versus, a quick statement that says, we have seen a rising trend over the last 4 years in relationship to whatever it is that's going on. So they are accessible. Use them. The same things that we have always talked about, which we'll go over again briefly, apply, right? You need to be thinking about if you're using color contrast that supports what you're trying to do, that has good color contrast. It does, like many of the Rise blocks, it has a tendency to, the default has pretty small text. People can zoom in on their browsers and make that text larger, but I tend to bump that up a little bit when you can. So just know that this exists. I would go ahead and bookmark it for yourself if you want. There is also a feature roadmap that's on there, which has some things that I think are exciting. There's the AI components, which will always be there. But lots to do with in-text, in-context translation validation, multi-language course workflows. I know there's a lot of push towards multi-language offerings. I know Stars does a lot with multi-language offerings. So there are some roadmap things that may make that a little bit easier as we go. This one I'm excited about, the distribution portion, quick shares. They're making some adjustments to tracking related to quick sharing. For those of you that don't know, the quick share, when you come into a course, I'm not the owner on that course. I don't think I'm the owner on this course either. There we go. If I go to share, I can go to preview and I can quickly share that course instead of, let's see, where was I? Instead of going through that full publish. That is how I share the course, the Authoring Accessible Rise modules course. The reason for that is that I constantly update that. So it felt better to share it that way. The downside is if I were bringing that into an LMS, there's less tracking. So they do on their roadmap have, and I have no idea how this is going to work, but there's going to be a little bit more tracking for those shareable links, which is nice.
Historically, the sharing in that way was also limited, correct? You could only share it a certain number.
For the review, it was limited, and they've adjusted some of that review.
Okay.
The share where you're sharing a preview, it is pretty wide open.
Okay.
Anyone can go in there and preview that. But we've avoided that. A lot of times they say in some of the literature that that there are limitations, like you can't have so many people in there. I have not run into that, and I think it is partially them just trying to get people to not do it that way, probably because of bandwidth issues, because it's hosting then on their server. And if they had a lot of people that were sharing in that way, I imagine it would start to bog some of that down versus publishing as a web element and hosting in your own space. So yeah, there's definitely, if you read through the literature, they discourage it, but it seems like that's starting to shift a little bit in there.
Okay, thanks.
I will throw this in the chat as well. And you can peruse that roadmap if you are interested later on. Okay, we're going to start here, which is where most of you will get to this, the Authoring Accessible Rise modules. I lose it quite consistently. Those of you that are in Asana, there are links to it in a number of different spaces too. But I generally just come to our search, type in authoring, and this one pops up. There are 2 PDFs associated with this too. I will tell you that the quick reference I am remaking right now. I reviewed it again yesterday, and mostly there are changes in the not accessible space. Previously, we had the quote carousel, image carousel spelled incorrectly, sorting activity, matching knowledge check, and the charts. The only thing left in there is the sorting activity. Everything else, they have made adjustments and it is now okay to use. So that one, just know that is in the process of updating. And then just a reminder that there is a checklist in here too. This checklist was built based on how I do reviews. This is exactly the process that I do when you all send me a Rise module to review. I look briefly at the theme. I double check collaborators on there. If there are logos, I look at logos, description, headings, images, and so on and so on and so on. So that is there to support you when you're going through and updating or making new modules, if you would like. And then, of course, there is the module. And this, like I said, is shared using that preview feature. And the reason for that is that constant update on there. So some of you may have been in there while things were changing. Jessie, our new hire, was going through that. She just said she finished this training the other day, and I was very actively editing this training yesterday. So who knows what her experience was. Couple of changes through here. Themes, I essentially just went through and changed this section, the navigation options, just to remind you that we do recommend sticking with the sidebar navigation, and that is the navigation that you're seeing right here. Outside of that, there's really very little that has changed in terms of themes. The only thing that I want to point out, and this did switch a while back, but I have seen it more kind of in use, is, let's see, where did I put it? Has to do with logo. Mostly this is happening in the State Department. SESTA quite often will not add logos to the trainings, although perhaps we should be adding logos. As screen resolution gets better and better and better, what I have seen is that some of our PNG outputs that our marketing folks are giving us are coming in and are not being represented in the best way because they are output based on some older kind of conditions and the resolution is a little bit low. A number of years ago, Rise added support for what's called a SVG file, which is a scalable vector graphic. A vector graphic, the big difference is a PNG is what's called a raster graphic, meaning it is built with pixels. And if you blow that up, you will start to see those pixels. An SVG file is a vector graphic, meaning it is built with math. That's as far as I can go on that. Who knows how that works entirely? But it means that you can scale that infinitely. You can scale it down really small, you can scale it up really big, and you will see no pixelation in there because of the way that vector graphics work. So if you are adding logos, I suggest adding, and really if you're adding any images, any icons, anything, I suggest adding those as SVG files. Likely you do not have SVG files for a lot of things. So if you're looking and trying to add something, I'm happy to walk through how to create an SVG file, or a lot of times if you look through, especially if you're at CDHD, Carly has all of our logos in a folder. And if you look closely at the file types in there, there are a lot of SVG files in there. I've seen this more with the State Department logo, where a PNG is getting put in and it's pixelating out, especially on some of those bigger screens. So I do have SVG files, and the media person at the State Department does have SVG files too. Almost no changes on the accessible with no extra work. The only caveat is they added some extra work, and that added extra work we'll talk about a little bit later on, but that is in the in-text heading level adjustments. And I'm going to pull this up so that we can edit it. Actually, we'll just look at this one in here. What on earth was I looking at in here? What this looks like, most of you, we have talked about this, and most of you have been using this, but now any bit of text that we have, when we select it, we can hit the paragraph format, and there are options for heading 2 through 5 in there. So you just need to be considering overall where that thing exists in the heading structure. And we'll look at the heading level lesson that goes over that a little bit in depth. It can get a little bit confusing as you're going through. Most of you know my opinion about heading 4s and heading 5s. I feel like if you've got heading 4s and heading 5s, your content is maybe a little bit, you're getting a little bit too much into benign minutia. That usually exists in like science-based courses where they are going deep and deep and deep into some really detailed elements of things. Heading 4s and heading 5s generally are not necessary. But outside of that, this mostly refers to our text-based blocks where it's just accessible right off the bat. The biggest consideration is color contrast on there, especially if you're using things like dividers, where if you have chosen a theme color that is relatively light, you may run into color contrast issues with that. With that shift a couple of years ago where they added the auto option for color contrast, that's not showing up so much anymore, but I have still seen areas where it gets a little bit squirrely. The accessible when done right. Table block, there's still limitations to this table block, and I have still seen a couple of spaces where people are trying to get that first column to be a header column, and it just doesn't exist right now. However, Rise did just add, and I have not, this is like as soon as I make updates, they add an update and I have to go through and add more updates. They added a code block, which is in beta, and is one of those things that may not be appropriate for many people if you're not familiar with HTML or general coding. But the other reality is with ChatGPT and other Gen AI spaces, this has become a lot more approachable. For example, so the code block, you go through, you add code, and you could quite literally just code a table in here. And you could code a table such that it has appropriate row headers, appropriate column headers, merge cells, whatever you want. But you have to understand how to do that. And the caveat that I throw in there is I've seen many people just take a screenshot of a complex table, throw it into ChatGPT and say, can you provide appropriate accessible HTML for this? And get that appropriate accessible HTML. My wife and I both use Gen AI on a pretty daily basis. I can tell you that it still throws all kinds of weird answers if you're asking it philosophical questions or historical questions, but code-based questions are pretty good most of the time. So even if you have no sense of what you're doing, sometimes you can get away with that and see. The suggestion that I have is that you check it with a screen reader afterwards using NVDA, or if you use JAWS, using JAWS on there. But that is coming. Like I said, it is still in beta. I have done no testing on that at this point, but it is there. Quotes. The biggest thing about this to remember is that a quote block is different than a text on image block. And a quote block should be used when you're using a quote instead of using that text on image and putting that in there. And the reason for that is it is announced differently by a screen reader. When a screen reader comes to that quote block, it says quote versus that text on image. And that's a pretty benign difference, but it is there. The biggest thing anytime you're using text on an image is you need to be aware of your contrasts. So you can kind of do some clever cropping, adjust your text overlay or whatever else you need to do to make that work. There is no options for adding alt text on the background image. If you're using a quote on an image, they assume that that is a decorative image and they don't give you an option for anything different. You can add alt text for the avatar if you have the avatar in there, the little figure that, you know, whoever said the quote in there. The updates to alt text, this is one of the areas where I'm still seeing the most inconsistency. And I have not seen a whole lot of brand new builds come in the last little bit. Most of it is older modules that are being redone. And so I have a hard time saying that people are doing this wrong because it is things that were done 100% right back when we did them in 2021 and 2022, 2023. But the baseline for this to remember is that Rise now defaults to decorative images. When you add an image, it adds an image with no alt text, and that image is decorative. So you really need to do nothing else if you want to leave that image as decorative. We have all talked about, there is a active debate. We've had conversations about this at Ally Idaho. I've had conversations with this with numerous people. There's an active debate about whether or not an image should ever be decorative. And I'm not here to make any judgment calls about that. My opinion, and you know, it's probably about half and half. My opinion is that most images are decorative. And that comes from the space of personally being easily distracted. And I, as a sighted user, can go through and I can say, oh, I don't need to think about that image. It's decorative, and I can throw that out. But if we are adding alt text, we are forcing someone into acknowledging that image. I can't remember, did I have it on this one? Learning targets, yes. So this is one that I see almost all the time. This was used for a long time in our trainings that were built around 2022. And there was some guidance that came out at that point to alt text everything. So when I look at these, the alt text for this image says picture of a target. It is my belief that that's useless because it has absolutely nothing to do with the content of the course. It is, however, a correct statement. It is a picture of a target. There is an issue with that. Anyone that just went through ICAD, what's the issue with the alt text that states a picture of a target? Anyone remember that?
It will already say that it's a picture, so it repeats.
Exactly. We don't need a picture of, because the screen reader will say graphic. So then you get graphic picture of. The only time it's appropriate to state what it is if the what it is matters to it. For example, pie chart, because graphic is different than pie chart. Graphics is not different than screenshot or picture. So there is, you should know, an active debate, and again, I'm not making a judgment call. If you believe that everything should be alt texted, continue to do that. And when your content comes across my screen, we'll probably have a conversation about that. And you can say, nope, I believe that. The best argument that I've heard for alt texting everything has to do with low vision users who are using screen readers. This conversation came up in Ally, Idaho, and it surrounded the idea that while it may not matter to a person with no vision, if you're marking that image as decorative, it could potentially be confusing to a low vision user who might be able to see some semblance of an image, that's something that is there, but can't see the full thing. So then they're in this spot where they're not hearing that an image is there, but they can kind of see that an image is there. And there's a potential for some confusion in that space. I really like that argument. Like I said, it's the best argument that I've heard to date. It has not swayed me enough that I would alt text this target. But you can figure out where you land in all of that. The biggest thing to remember is that zoom image on click button. And this is the other spot that I'm seeing a lot of. And I want to just take a minute and remind people why this is important. So the zoom image on click button is under the format menu. Down at the bottom, there's a space that says zoom image and a checkbox that is checked by default. I see this as a failure in articulate space, that they went through and made it so that every image is decorative by default, but also by default left this checkbox checked. And the reason for that is that if you don't have alt text, the way that this is announced, if you've just put in a decorative image, that image is ignored entirely. But if you've left zoom image on click checked, somebody will also hear zoom image. So they get an option to zoom an image that they didn't know existed in the first place, which obviously would cause some confusion and some questions about, did I miss something? Did I miss an image in there? So this is the big one that you want to make sure that you are unchecking. If your image has alt text, then it becomes a judgment call on your part about, do you want people to be able to zoom it, or do you not want people to be able to zoom it? I've seen a lot of screenshots of EdPlan. Quite often, those are not readable in screenshot format. So in that case, it's pretty appropriate to keep that zoom image on click selected. But other times it becomes less important. So that is one. I'm still seeing a lot of this. I check it on everything that gets sent by me, and quite often I just go through and uncheck that. But it does save a lot of time. If you are going through and doing updates, just do a quick check to see if an image has alt text, and check to see if that enable zoom image on click is checked there too. From this era, there is also a lot of images that have that null tag too. The null tag is the double quotation mark that got put in, which previously was the only way to mark an image as decorative. And if you remember from this era, the three things that would happen is if you brought an image in and didn't alt text it, Rise made it such that a screen reader would read the entire file name of that image, which was a nightmare. You had to add a null tag if you wanted that decorative. And there was all kinds of things that I saw during that era with people would type null, quotation, there was all kinds of fun things that came across during that. The quotation marks don't hurt anything. If you see them when you're doing a review or updating things, they still act as a null tag. They still function for it to be decorative, but they also are not necessary. So just make sure that you're double checking alt text when you're updating modules, removing it if it is not necessary, and unchecking that zoom image on click on there. And there are a lot of notes in there about that. Image blocks, same thing. You know, if you're using the text over image, just really be conscious about that contrast. Text on images will always provide issues, or has the potential to provide issues, because an image has variable colors on it, right? If I'm looking at Stacy's background, there's a bright white center at the middle where the trees kind of open up into the end of that trail. But overall, the contrast is pretty dark over the rest. So if you had white text going over that image, right where it hits that center space, it would be really problematic. But if you had dark text over that image, it would also be problematic because it would be nice over the white and really bad over the rest of the image. So you have to adjust that by in Rise going through and adjusting the overlay or the opacity of that image so that you can get either your image darker if you're using light text, or your image lighter if you're using dark text. I always suggest trying to crop your image such that it's not going over a space where there is a variety of contrast. For example, in this image, there's a city with a mountain. There's also an area of just kind of blank sky in there. And you could, if you're cleverly cropping, you could crop it such that the text only exists in that sky area so that you have less issues with contrast in there. I have updated the clear list of things. Essentially, you need to consider your image's alt text, which may be not a consideration at all, right? If it's just decorative, just leave it. You need to consider it on all of the image blocks, the accordion tabs, labeled graphics, essentially anything that you can add an image to, you need to be considering that alt text. All of these too, when you add those, in the format, are going to have that zoom image option. So even if it's not an image-based block, generally, if you can incorporate it, it's going to have that option to zoom image on click. And there might be one block that this has an exception for, might be the process block. I can't remember at this point, but there's one that's still a little bit funky. Also important to remember, like we talked about, and we'll look at this in a second too, that most of our interaction blocks have added the option to adjust the heading levels for whatever it is. So for example, on the accordion block, embracing discovery is set by default as a heading level 2. That's not always appropriate. In fact, most often our accordion blocks should be heading level 3s because they are a component of an existing heading level 2 that has been put in. The tabs does not have that option. For some reason, they did not add that anywhere in tabs, but accordion, process, a few of the other ones have got that option in there.
Luca, this is Shannon.
Yeah.
Why would it be important to go in and change it to heading 3? Or is it just an option?
It is an option. And the reason that this is kind of a space where they've forced our hand a little bit, because it used to be just a paragraph. Now that it's a heading, it's purely to kind of alleviate some confusion for potential screen reader users that come in. For example, if I have on to multimedia, let's see, do I have any accordions in here? Well, let's say this, even though I just said the tabs does not give you that option, the example will remain. So here's the clear list. This is a paragraph with heading, which means that it's a heading level 2. In the image category, in the interactive category, and in the knowledge check category are subheadings of that heading level 2. So it's purely about reducing confusion, because those should be a component of here's the clear list. They should not be on the same level as here's the clear list. But the default, so this is kind of like that zoom image on click where they made a change. It's a really great change. It provides more options for people to navigate if they're using a screen reader, but they defaulted to it being a heading level 2, which is almost never appropriate because you're very rarely going to start something with an accordion. Accordion is almost always a component of some heading that you have put in there. Does that answer that question, Shannon?
Yeah, I just wanted to know, because of the default, I need to be really clear when I do something like this that I go in and check heading 3.
Yep. And to be clear, it's a point of potential confusion. It's not a barrier. If you forgot it, it would not be the end of the world. It's still going to give people options to jump heading to heading. There's also a kind of raging debate about heading level 3s and heading level 4s and when it's appropriate to change those different things. So people would still have, if they're using a screen reader and pressing their H key, it's still going to jump from heading to heading to heading. There's just a slight potential for confusion because they would hear, here's the clear list as a heading level 2, and then image in the image category as a heading level 2. But it's not the end of the world if you forget that. Multimedia, the biggest shift that has happened here is that Rise has added, let's see. The option to add audio blocks in almost every thing that they have. So now when I add an accordion, there's a section for audio in there too. And you can go through, if we had AI, you could add AI audio, you can record audio, or you can upload existing audio. To be honest, I have not really found a space where this would be necessary, but I do have a story about where we chose to do this in previous trainings. When I was working with Idaho Living Well and creating trainings with Jen McGilkey-Seiler, we identified that our population, the self-advocates that were our primary audience for those trainings, had a variety of needs. We had some people that could not read. And as a result, they wanted to be independent. They wanted to navigate these modules independently, but they couldn't read the modules themselves. So we added on-demand voiceover for every single slide that we had in there to give them that autonomy so that if they wanted to, they could go through and they could use that on-demand voiceover. Our primary audience is not generally in that category. So the people using screen readers in our primary audiences are generally using a screen reader not because of a lack of ability to read, but because of a lack of ability to see. So I want you to know that there are reasons to use those audio voiceovers, but I have not seen a space where it is relevant now. Does anyone read the New York Times? Couple people in here. I have noticed, and probably you have too, that there's been a shift over the last year where almost every article has the option to be read by an AI voice when you go in now. So you open up an article and there's an option up at the top where you can say, listen to the article, and it will read everything in that screen. And it's kind of a nice thing. You can go in, I use it quite often, and it states in the beginning, this article will be read. It's read by an automated voice, blah, 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 and then it reads the article. So that could be something that we could discuss or you might consider for these. And then we get into this interesting spot where if you are doing something similar to that, if you are adding an audio block up at the top, you might just add a caption that says, if you would prefer to listen to this lesson, play the audio here. And then we get into this interesting spot where you really no longer need a transcript for that audio because your lesson itself is the transcript for that audio. Whereas normally you would add a transcript file that provides that. You're really in the space where you've got that transcript. The caveat there is you have to make sure that everything in your lesson is being read. So if you have alt texted images, you need to add that alt text into the reading of that, or add some audio description into the reading of that. I've been thinking about this a lot, mostly because of pushes towards and interest in podcasts. We know that we have a population that likes to listen to things because we know when you're listening to something, you can be doing something else. I listened to 2 chapters of my book while I was cooking dinner the other night. It was lovely. I got to read my book. I got to cook dinner. I got to do all of those things at once. So that is there. I like that idea conceptually. I think that's a conversation that you have with your team as you're developing new trainings to figure out if that's something that you want to add. If you are doing that, I would be using AI voiceover to generate all of that. And I really like the way that New York Times does it, where they state that it's an automated voice, because an automated voice still sounds like an automated voice. They've gotten really good, but they are still automated.
Suka,
Yeah.
did you just, I kind of was distracted for a second, but I got honed back in when you were talking about the audio over the content. Does it have to be only read like word for word, or can you deliver a training and then have the content in the module just represent the information, kind of like we would in an actual training?
There's, because of the need for the transcript, if you're providing audio at the beginning, it should be a pretty close one-to-one
Okay.
for that. And that just generally comes down to thinking about who's getting what experience, right? You wouldn't want the person that's listening to the audio to get a completely different training experience than the person that's going through and going through that kind of point and click, the text-based training that you have in there. That being said, you know, if you're being clear about that you're saying like, here's the audio from a live training that will discuss the content in this lesson, that might be an appropriate way to do that. But we would want to delineate, because audio generally, and in that case, you would likely want to provide a transcript for that. But because we don't know how someone is going to navigate your content, could be that they come and they go, no, I don't want that audio. I'm just going to go through this training and read it myself. And then they would miss out on that kind of differentiated audio experience.
Sure.
I have a comment.
Yeah.
We sort of experimented with that at Idaho Stars in the early days. And, you know, in the audio, I would make it more conversational. And we found it was just too distracting. Users did not like it at all. And even myself, when I was reviewing, I was like, wait a minute, that's not what I said. I mean, what I said doesn't match what the screen says. And it was just really distracting. So we went back with the 1-to-1 ratio.
Yeah, I think generally it would be a better practice to just provide it as a 1-to-1 on there. And some of us have worked together on spaces. There are definitely areas where you want to add audio. For example, there were some quizzes that were implemented based on an image where one of you, I can't remember which module this was, but you were saying like, look at this image and describe something. Well, if you can't look at the image, that doesn't matter. But the adding alt text, we were running into some issues with, well, then we're just providing the answer to the person. So in some of those cases, we provided an audio block with kind of more of like Paige is saying, a conversational description of what's going on, so that we could talk about that thing and then go through. So there's spaces where it's a potential you can be using it. I want to keep on going because we've got 10 minutes to get through the rest of it. Heading levels, like I said, we've talked about this a little bit as we've gone through. The things to keep in mind about this, remember about this, is your lesson is your heading level 1. That's why there's no option for a heading level 1 throughout. Your lesson title is your heading level 1. Heading level 2s are a standard heading block. Heading level 3s are a standard subheading block. And then past that, when you're doing, if you need a heading level 4, a heading level 5, that's where you use that paragraph option. The big space where I've seen this be really helpful is the areas where we're using an image and text block, because previously what we did was we made that top statement bold, because there was no other option for that. Now we can set that as a heading level 3 or a heading level 4 or heading level 5, depending on what you're using. So that information is in there now. Now let's get to the one that's brand new, which is custom blocks. These are really fun. And this was added in the last couple of months to Rise. Custom blocks are exactly what it sounds like. They are fully custom. You can do all kinds of adjustments in there. And I do want to bring up, we'll look at the interface for this because there are some spaces where, like anything, when you get more custom, there's more things that you have to think about. The biggest thing is reading order that you have to be considering. Not so much of an issue with this top one, but I put this one in here because you can add shapes, you can add pictures to the shapes, you can do all kinds of fun things that make it look like you're a some kind of rise wizard that is in there. You can also, I mean, there's just a lot of different options in here, but you need to really consider your reading order because the default is not always what you think. When I first made this block with the birdies telling you different things about the custom blocks, the reading order was not set correctly. So it was reading this one first, the top one first, then it was reading the third one, then the fourth one, then going back up to the second one. So we'll take a minute and look at how to set that. So the custom blocks, when you hit your plus sign, custom blocks are down at the bottom. There's a little arrow. And this can be overwhelming because there are a lot of different options in here. You can use a fully blank block and just build it 100% yourself. You can use any one of these pre-made ones. So if we go to testimonials, we've got this guy in here. Most of the pre-made blocks do have the correct reading order, but they don't always have the correct heading level structure if that's appropriate for that. But we've got this in here, and you will notice now if I hit my content editor option, which is the pencil, it's going to load the custom block interface. And then we've got a lot of different options. There's templates. We can add shapes in there. You can add images to the shapes. You can add colors to the shapes. You can do many, many things. You can add images. You can add audio. You can adjust the existing things that are in there. This is grouped right now, but we can ungroup it. We can say, you know what? I would really like him more in a cloud burst. Whatever, sunshine burst. I don't know what that thing is. So lots and lots of different ways that you can customize these things. The text, when we come into, there's two options. There's object order. This is your stacking order. So the reason that this image is behind that bottom space is that the stacking order has been set. So if we come in here and look at this, if I brought that rectangle up to the top, it's going to go over that image and over that text. That does not affect your reading order at all. That purely affects the visual order of everything on screen. When I come to my focus order, this is where your reading order is. So the thing to keep in mind for this gets a little bit confusing because they have an alternate text space for text too. And I have not done some testing to see what goes on there, but this may be an interesting spot when we're dealing with acronyms that are being mispronounced. It's possible, and I haven't tested it yet, that we could write out the name of that acronym in there in the alternate text, and then that is what would be read out, but I haven't tested that yet. But when we look here, we've got the card and image group. There's the text card. That is just the rectangle that has that. So we leave our alternate text blank on there because it is a decorative image. Then we have a subgroup where we have text and we have the line. So on our image, where did we go? Who knows? Disappeared. Let's close it out. Come back in. We've got this line to the left. That is an added element, and it's an added element that you need to consider alt text for. It's decorative, so we don't need to do anything on there. Really, the only thing that is non-decorative is that text. And text, if it doesn't have alt text, is still read out. So what we're looking at really on here is this text is read first. Let's see, we'll do it on this one. This text is read first. Then the name is read next, which is appropriate. That's how we want to have that be. Everything else, because we have not added alt text to any of the images, will be decorative. It's not going to be announced by anything. So we can leave that all as is. But if you did have something that you wanted to add alt text to, You would add that alt text in there, and then it would be announced in the order that you have set it in the focus order pane. I have not tested all of these because there's just too many options in there, especially with it being a fully custom space. You're going to have to do some of your own testing on there with the screen reader to make sure that everything is working on there. So if you don't have it, download NVDA and install it, and use NVDA to read. And remember, NVDA plus S switches your speech mode, so you can change it to silent as you're going. This was a problem for one of our people recently who was trying to test with the screen reader, then couldn't figure out how to turn it off. It was yelling at her. The whole office could hear her screen reader, and she finally quite literally just pulled the plug on her computer and plugged it back in. You can silence your screen reader as you're going through, but you need to know how to do it. So custom blocks are really fun. I'm pretty excited about the addition of the custom blocks and the addition of the code blocks is going to make customization a lot easier on there and provides us this nice in between, because most of you will remember there is also, let's see, I think it's an interactive, the storyline block, right? Where you could be making fully custom things in storyline and then integrating it in. I can tell you that I don't see more than maybe 2 people on here that have used storyline and integrated that in there, but it is the option in there. But the custom blocks and the code blocks give us kind of an in-between where it's still pretty easy to use. It's that nice rise kind of plug and play thing, but it's going to give us a lot more customization options. I'm not sure if it's going to make a difference to our learners, but I can tell you that I've talked to another people who are bored with Rise because it's essentially the same thing over and over and over again. Our students don't necessarily feel that, but I know that it makes a difference for our content creators. So lots of different options for customizing now, which is great. Last one on here, sorting activity. That's the one that you still can't use, but it is on the roadmap. Okay, we are right at the end. I do want people to feel comfortable, people to feel like they have time to ask questions if you have questions. So I will stay on. Does anybody have any pressing questions that they want to go over now? This could be related to this or something you're working on or whatever you have. And if not, that is fine too. So lots of different changes. Hopefully you all have some fun in there as you are making your new modules. Use some of those new blocks, switch some things up, and reach out if you run into issues with anything.
I just wanted to say that all of your coaching us on accessibility has come in handy because we needed to be able to provide a PowerPoint that was thankfully accessible in the moment for people who had registered late and didn't inform us that they needed certain types of accessibility. And so it came in very handy having things easily accessible.
That's awesome.
That we could just email.
That's great. I'm glad to hear that. Yay, way to go, team.
Thank you, Suka. I appreciate all you do.
Happy to help. It's great to see all of you. Once I find my my Zoom thing that disappeared somewhere during this, I will end the meeting. We'll talk to you all later.